You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Monster House presents.
Monster Talk is proud to be a part of the Airwave Media family, home of such shows as the Daily Meditation Podcast, The Accidental Creative, and I Know What Scares You. If you'd like to advertise on this show, contact sales at advertisecast.com.
Something is terrorizing the southern United States.
I just thought, oh no, she's going to tear me to pieces.
A creature not known for its massive size may be reaching monstrous proportions.
They'll kill you. They'll eat you.
Eyewitnesses claim to see hogs 10 feet long and weighing half a ton.
When you start seeing tracks as big as my hand, you know you got a monster hog.
Are they enormous escaped farm animals or giant wild hogs?
But the first couple rounds in, didn't faze him. He just kept coming.
Monster Quest will launch an expedition to decipher the evidence.
We want a monster hog. That's the thrill of going to check the trap.
It's actually quite unlike anything we've ever seen before.
A giant, hairy creature, part ape, part man.
In Loch Ness, a 24-mile-long bottomless lake in the Highlands of Scotland. It's a creature known as the Loch Ness Monster.
Monster Talk.
Welcome to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
As you heard in that introduction clip from the TV show Monster Quest, the feral pigs become fully monsterized in American folklore. I myself have contributed to the spread of this idea because I'm familiar with the real-world farm damage these animals can do, and I've long been fascinated with the morphological changes that occur to domestic farm pigs that get out and go feral. In this two-part interview, we will be talking to a man who spent his entire professional career studying the morphology of pigs, and we're going to cut through some of the fatty lore and get down to the lean facts. Are domestic hogs really the werewolves of the farm? Do they turn into monsters when freed from the calorically rich world of the hog farm? Can a feral hog reach the 1,000-pound, 12-foot length described in news stories? The answer to these questions is complicated, but I can tell you that I learned a lot in this interview, and it's changed how I will be talking about this topic going forward, and hopefully it'll do the same for you. In Part 1, we'll be looking into the biology of pigs and separate the facts from the folklore as regards their behavior. In Part 2, we'll be looking at the big media stories about giant feral hogs and find out what was really going on in those cases. Well, now, let's get hog wild with some
Monster Talk.
Dr. John J. Mayer is a research scientist and manager of environmental sciences at the Savannah River National Laboratory in Aiken, South Carolina. He's worked for 50 years in the study of wild pigs, with much of that work being on the morphology of these animals. His work on pigs has included direct involvement with several famous allegedly giant hogs, including Hogzilla, Monster Pig, and Son of Hogzilla. I'm excited by this interview because I find pigs far more interesting than just being my constant breakfast companion, and I hope that by the end of our discussion you'll agree that some pigs are bores, but no pigs are boring. So, welcome to my...
You got to wonder about somebody that studies wild pigs for 50 years.
Yeah.
You have to wonder about yourself.
Again, I've been giving them intense study every breakfast, every day, but I guess we should get started with the most basic question, which is, what's a pig?
Well, that's one of the cloven-hoofed mammals, actually one of the more primitive cloven-hoofed mammals. There are, 8 different types of wild pigs around the world, about one of them being Eurasian wild boar, and about 8 to 10,000 years ago in various parts of Eurasia, wild boar were domesticated, producing domestic swine, domestic pigs, whatever noun you want to use. And that's typically, when you talk about pigs, that's typically what people are referring to, especially when you're talking about bacon.
So, Jack, I'm pig ignorant here. So I wanted to ask you, what's the difference between pigs and hogs and boars? Is there a difference at all? I get confused.
Not really. I mean, depends on how you can use the noun boar to mean Eurasian wild boar, or you can mean it to use a male pig, whether it's a domestic pig or a warthog or a red river hog, whatever. So, and those nouns get misused a lot. So that all adds to the confusion.
Right.
How are domestic pigs different from wild pigs? I mean, obviously there's some size differences and other things, but like, what is it that what has domesticity brought to the pig that its wild cousins don't have? And they're probably not cousins. Sorry.
The selective breeding that we've done for domestic pigs over the years has produced much larger animals than most wild pigs. Has produced a larger variety of coat coloration patterns. You've got all sorts of paint jobs. You've got solid red or white or black. You've got spotted animals. You've got belted animals. You've got animals with light points, the tips of the feet, tip of the nose, tip of the tail. And in domestication, wild pigs are typically raised on a fairly high plane of nutrition. So when you do that with a pig, this has an effect on the skeletal morphology. With the skull, for example, these animals end up having proportionally much wider skulls, and the lateral view of the skull, the dorsal profile, becomes more and more concave. You also see that in zoo wild boar. They tend to have more concave dorsal profiles than free living wild boar.
Oh, interesting. So they're still wild pigs but they're in a zoo, so their diet lends them to have these morphological
Pigs are very plastic in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
One of those being that depending on the plane of nutrition that they're raised on, that has a major impact on their physical morphology. So, and again, the skulls are our classic example, and that's also true of a lot of other wild animals, whether you're talking lions or whatever, that if you put them in a zoo and stuff them, say lions, stuff them full of Purina lion chow, they end up having proportionally wider skulls. So, this is something that's not unusual in captive mammals and fairly consistent at the same time.
Wow. Okay. I'm just diving here, but does that mean also that their embryo or their fetuses also have, like, since they're the product of better nutrition, do the babies have bigger skulls as well? Which
they can be larger, but typically they're not that different from.
Gotcha. These are emergent, like adolescent adult type things. Yeah.
This is being raised to physical maturity. Again, it's the plane of nutrition that determines what the endpoint looks like.
Gotcha.
Okay, well, so I'm from Australia originally, if you can't tell, and I'm just wondering if there's anything special or unique about pigs in Australia, or any specific types of pigs that you don't find elsewhere, or is it they're pretty common no matter where you find them?
The thing about pigs in Australia is you have a lot more than we do. The population estimate nationwide in Australia is about 20 million. Currently in the U.S., for example, I think we're right at 7 million right now. As far as types of pigs, they're largely fairly typical feral pigs, wild pigs that are solely of domestic ancestry. The pigs up in around the Coburg Peninsula and over around Darwin do have coat coloration patterns that suggest that they have some wild boar in their ancestry. How far back, we don't know, but they do have light tip bristles and other physical features that would indicate that there's some wild boar in the mix there.
Wow, I'm glad I asked. Interesting.
Yeah, it's like it's one of those. There's not a, or maybe there is some sort of convergent sort of marsupial pig equivalent fitting that niche, but I don't know what it would be. That's interesting. Well, what are peccaries? Because they look like pigs, but are they related to pigs? Are they convergent? Are they cousins? Or what's a peccary?
Okay, that's another mammalian family. I can't remember how many millions of years ago it was, but they diverged from the pig ancestors. Actually, in both true pigs and peccaries evolved in the old world, in Eurasia and in Africa. Oddly enough, the peccaries made it across the Bering Land Bridge. The true pigs did not.
No.
And then the peccaries continued to evolve here in the New World. Currently, we've got 3 species. Well, it depends on who you talk to, but typically most people would agree we have 3 species of peccaries. The collared peccary, which in the U.S. we call javelina, white-lipped peccaries, which are from Mexico down into South America, and then the Chacoan peccary, which was only discovered to be alive, was thought to be an extinct species, but it was discovered to be alive in 1975 in Paraguay, and they're also found in parts of northern Argentina and eastern Bolivia. And I actually got to spend 3 field seasons down there in Paraguay studying. That was the first ecological study of the Chacoan peccary. Again, an animal that we thought was completely extinct.
That's cool. What kind of population did you uncover? Are they doing okay? Just they were hidden?
They aren't. They're very limited distribution, and like a lot of animals down there, the locals just hunt the heck out of them. So
probably make them into delicious barbecue.
Well, they are. I've eaten a number of them. They are quite good, but that's
Yeah.
Oh, well, are there any other pig adjacent, if that's a phrase, animals that fit the pig niche? And are warthogs really pigs?
Well, warthogs are, and giant forest hogs, babirusa, red river hogs, bush pigs.
That's an insult in Australia.
Bearded pigs. There's a number of wild pig species in the family Suidae.
Oh my gosh! I'm just looking at a red river hog. I've never seen one of those. That's a wildly beautiful looking pig.
They sort of look like a Dr. Seuss creation.
Yeah, the hair reminds me a little bit of a bobcat. It's like a bobcat pig. That's neat.
Long tasseled ears, a really interesting paint job. So
this will be a check the show notes episode. I'll try to put lots of links to some of the photos and other pig adjacent information. So I'm using adjacent a lot tonight. When did humans domesticate the pig? Do we know? I mean, obviously, at least it goes back to biblical times, because I remember reading about them as being a great repository for demons.
Well, again, about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago in various parts of the Eurasian supercontinent.
Wow.
And there were multiple sites of pig domestication. It didn't happen in one place and spread from there. It happened in multiple places and sort of spread and then converged.
Oh, I see. So pig domestication happened after the land bridge would have, I guess, I don't know when that closed, but if we've...
the Bering Land Bridge would have been gone.
Yeah, okay. Wow. That is really neat.
Well, Jack, I'm vegetarian, so I eschew pigs, bacon, ham. Clearly you eat that kind of food, and I know Blake does.
Every day.
Every day.
Doing my part.
I'm just curious about any thoughts that you might have on the number of religions that prohibit the consumption of pigs.
There's a lot of debate about where that came from. There's a very good book. It's called Eat Not This Flesh, that discusses all that. And they really think where that came from was, a lot of people used to say, well, they're dirty and they're full of disease. And, they knew that back then, like, you shouldn't eat it because you're going to get, trichinosis. And no, that's not the case. Turns out that pigs are not a herding animal. So people that had domestic pigs had to be fairly sedentary. The pigs had to be, for the most part, confined in sties to be fed and whatnot. And when you had herding cultures, as you did in the Middle East, people that were sedentary and stayed in one place and all their garbage accumulated there, and they had these animals that made messes and just were, just terrible to clean up after and whatnot, that those were sort of people you looked down on. And not only them, but the animals that they had, like pigs. So...
Yeah, I had heard so many different explanations, including that pigs compete for the same food as humans and the disease idea. But the difference in how you would have to keep them versus a sort of a wandering herdsman type thing, that makes really good sense. It really does. Now, pigs, obviously, we've all seen Charlotte's Web and Babe. But how smart are pigs, really?
Oh, they're very smart.
Okay.
They're very smart. We've raised a number of them in the house. They're easier to paper train than puppies, and they are very smart. They always got along with our dogs, and they always could outsmart our dogs.
And I assume you're talking like potbellies, little pigs, right?
No, well, these were wild piglets that hunters had killed the mother and got the litter of pigs, and so we always were willing to give them. And we used to keep them until they start turning over furniture, and then you got to find another home for them. So,
looking for
they
those,
are absolutely adorable, and
finding truffles under your couch.
Yeah. Well, that is interesting. My husband used to have a pot-bellied pig, or at least he was told it was, and it grew a lot larger. So I don't know exactly, which kind it was. But it was confiscated by Denver Council. I don't know if it went to a petting zoo or something like that. But outside of people such as yourself, experts in pigs, should the average person have a pig as a pet, or what do you feel about pigs as pets?
Well, you better look at your zoning laws, whether they're going to allow you to have livestock or not. So,
right.
That would be the first question. As far as raising a pig, we didn't find it any different than raising puppies, or dogs. So,
wow.
I love
and again,
them.
they're very smart.
I've seen some adorable potbelly, and I honestly,
TikTok and Instagram.
Well, my grandfather raised hogs, so I was like literally around hogs a lot when I was growing up, and I saw some that were cute and smart, and some that were just mean. I remember my uncle was always complaining because when the sows would have babies, they would sometimes roll over on the babies, but then they'd be like, so they've killed some of the babies, but then they would be mean and they wouldn't let you get in there and get the babies out. So it created all kinds of challenges. He was, I guess maybe he was a little bit resentful that he had to live with his dad and help raise hogs and wanted to be out doing other things. Took it out.
That happens in the wild too. Where the sows will inadvertently roll on newborns in the nest, and it just, inadvertent crushing like that happens. So, and pigs, especially domestic pigs, are very good protected mothers.
Yes, yeah.
You always hear these stories though about how wild pig sows, boy, you better not go. She's got a litter of pigs. You better not go up there. She's going to defend her litter, and not to tell people to do something they shouldn't do. But I've never had trouble running a sow off her piglets in the wild. You make yourself loud and big and crashing and booming, and she'll turn and look at the kids and go, "Bye, gang," and she's gone.
I can make more later. Bye. That's funny. Well, it's interesting anyway.
At the same time, though, if it's a coyote that goes in there after that litter of pigs, that sow will tear that coyote up. They are very
really.
Well, yeah. They are. They can be quite fierce fighters, from what I've seen, and that's just on the farm. That's without tusks. So I can't even imagine what. Well, and of course you read in mythology people hunting hogs with spears and how dangerous that is. I don't. I guess I've always been curious because after seeing the European boars, which I'm guessing probably 60 to 80 pounds, something like that, the ones I've seen in the wild.
They can get up bigger than that. Yeah. Typically, they're adult males are around 200 pounds. Females are around 175.
I've been seeing runts.
You can get individuals for a variety of reasons. Again, if they're in an area that's got good forage, that can get upwards of 500 pounds. I mean, it's been documented.
Karen, just
Incredible.
As an FYI, probably the most famous giant hog as a monster movie is Razorback, and I believe that's set in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it, though.
Absolutely.
It's a hole in my watching list too, but I keep getting recommendations that I should check it out. That is far better than I'm imagining. So
I'm not sure I would agree with that, but you might want to see it.
But then again, you don't know how bad some of the movies I watch are. So
yeah, this is true.
I have a certain affinity for 1970s horror that a lot of people would just discard right into the discount bin. So,
Yes.
yeah. Anyway, but let's get back to pigs. behavior, ethology. I know we're going to be splitting this episode in half, but would you mind doing sort of like what's their behavior like? You know, how big do they get in groups in the wild? How many pigs in a litter in the wild compared to the farm? That kind of thing. Just some stats, you know.
All right. So again, basics, size-wise, males are bigger than females. It's has to do with male-male competition for breeding opportunities for females. So the males have to be bigger. Again, whether you're talking wild pigs here in the U.S. or over in Europe, adult males are about 200 pounds. Females are about 175, more or less. They're born at a little less than 2 pounds in weight. Litters are in utero or around, they average around 6. What actually comes out and hits the ground is closer to 5. You get some interuterine death. They can live in the wild up to about 14, 15 years. That's an extreme. Most of them probably don't make it past 8. The average lifespan is only 1.5 years. And that's primarily because of very high mortality in the first 4 months of life can be as
so it throws the averages way off.
As high as 90%, yeah.
Really?
So, litter size, again, the social unit size, the basic social unit is the family unit, a sow with her young. You get multiple family units with multiple sows and their collective litters. Mature boars are, males. They're just difficult anyway. Mature boars are solitary.
Yeah.
So they only get together with the sows for breeding opportunities.
So that sort of implies that the females go through a heat cycle or estrus. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And if they're not bred during that initial estrus cycle, they will come into estrus again several months down the road. Also, if they do get pregnant, they have what's called a postpartum estrus, which means that after they birth that litter of pigs, within the next few days, they are in estrus again, so they can get bred again.
Well,
so you can have wild sows that they're nursing a litter of pigs, and they've got another litter in utero.
Wow.
Very taxing on that poor sow, but it does happen. So they can have 2 litters in a 12-month period of time. The gestation period, by the way, is like domestic pigs. It's 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days.
Good grief, though, the caloric requirements for being a mom, raising internally and also feeding. My gosh, they must have a lot of caloric requirements.
They do, and they can often lose that litter that's in utero just because they physiologically can't support that litter.
Well, and are there any differences between wild pigs and farmed pigs with this information?
Yes, domestic pigs have much larger litters. They have been selectively bred to have larger litters, talking upwards of around 30. Typically, the average domestic litter is around 8 to 10, but they can have quite large litters. Again, only 2 per year.
Well, this is a fantastic segue into the big question, I think, that I really wanted to talk about, which is what happens when a domestic pig that has all these selected traits goes feral out in the wild. And I've talked about this before on the show, but I want to hear it from an expert because some of my information comes from reading, but some comes from TV documentaries, some of which are really good and some of which are really bad. And I don't necessarily know what's the right information here because what I've seen is very dramatic and what kind of changes can happen.
I think typically what you hear anecdotally is that when a domestic pig goes wild, and just to talk about that briefly, for whatever reason, domestic pigs go wilder quicker than any other species of domestic animal that we have. This is something that's been documented as far back as the time of Charles Darwin. And when a domestic pig goes wild, very often you'll hear that, within days or weeks or months or sometimes less than a year, these animals are going to start looking like wild boar. Well, I'm sorry, that's not true. I hate to burst that bubble, but it's not true. It's a little complicated, though, so let's talk about that for a moment. So if you've got a domestic pig that's been raised to physical maturity, so that's 3 to 5 years of age, and that animal gets loose and goes wild. Again, pigs go wild very quickly. Domestic pigs go wild very quickly. They like that wild life. What's going to happen to them morphologically? Well, so they're no longer going to be on that high plane of nutrition. They're not going to be feeding them full of Purina pig chow. They're going to be out there having to root and look and find acorns and I'm sorry, there just aren't enough good groceries out there to match up with the life on Purina pig chow. So number one, that animal is going to lose weight. Some of their morphology is plastic. When they go wild, if it's colder out there than where they were in captivity, they will get longer hair, but their snout's not going to get longer. Their tusks aren't going to get longer. Realize though that domestic pigs have very large tusks. That's a fact. Very often, because in domestic pigs, remember the plane of nutrition makes the skull proportionally wider. That often causes an offset of the tusks, the upper and lower tusks. So you don't get the lower tusk wearing on the upper tusk. So very often you'll see domestic pigs that have these big, complete circles of lower tusks. Very impressive. But domestic pigs do have big tusks. So again, not a lot of differences. They're going to drop weight. They might have longer hair. Other than that, you're not going to see much different. Now, let's complicate the situation. Let's take a litter of 6 piglets. Okay, they've just been born. Let's give them a couple months with mom so they get a little bit bigger. And we're going to take 3 of those piglets and we're going to stick them in the pig pen and stuff them full of Purina pig chow for the next 3 to 5 years. We're going to take the other 3 and we're going to throw them out in the swamp and let them go. We're going to go back 3 to 5 years later, and we're going to see what happened. Well, the ones that you stuck in the pig pen and stuffed full of Purina pig chow, they're going to look like the usual large, proportionally wider, deep dished face that you see in your classic domestic pig. Those 3 that we kicked out in the swamp are going to be smaller. Because they're not out there on a high plane of nutrition, the skull is going to be, and the body will be proportionately narrower, not as wide as the domestic pig. They're also not going to have that dished dorsal profile in the skull. They're going to have a fairly flat dorsal profile, almost kind of looking like a wild boar, but not quite. That has to do with, again, the plane of nutrition that you're raised on. That determines the depth of that dorsal profile in a pig. So there are differences that occur, but those are developmental differences. Again, that all goes back to that plane of nutrition. So, that's the reality of the situation. So it's not that they, when they go wild, again, depending on what age they are, that they're going to automatically go back to looking like a wild boar. That just doesn't work. But if the animal is young enough and ends up getting away and growing up in the wild on that lower plane of nutrition, yes, morphologically, they're going to be very different from a domestic pig.
Wow. Okay.
And that's the truth.
Well, the truth is important. I want them to be the werewolves of the farmyard where they can turn into monsters. But if they're not, they're not. And so I feel like this is great because you've helped remove some of the nonsense from my head. And that's really always my goal.
Well, you definitely need to see the movie Razorback then.
Okay.
Yeah, we will.
I think Roger Ebert said it was the finest horror film about a giant pig that he had seen. So
just about the only horror film.
I think that was the joke. Exactly.
Well, with you talking about pigs rooting, it just made me think about truffles. And I'm just curious, why are pigs used to hunt truffles?
Because the subterranean fungus truffles, it's called a truffle, gives off the same chemical odor that it's actually chemically identical to sex hormones in pigs.
Oh, wow.
You didn't see that one coming, did you?
No.
This is why pigs have a fascination for digging up truffles, because they're attracted to the scent. Now, you can train dogs to do the same thing. Just they have to be keyed in on that particular scent, and they will do the same thing as a pig. But that's why pigs were used to do that.
So truffles smell like sexually active pigs.
They give off an odor that's chemically identical to sex hormones in pigs.
Wow. And I'm thinking about how many fungi also look like penises. This is it's like there's something going. The fungi, something's going on in the fungal world. It's like anyway. So these morphological changes that can occur, do we know? Well, I mean, obviously it's diet related in some way, and any of the changes that do happen that are physical, do they reflect a behavior change? I mean, can these wild hogs or feral hogs, can they be reintroduced into a farm situation and behave, or do they become problem pigs once they've sort of been removed from that environment?
We could. I mean, we've had wild pigs that we've caught and kept in a pen for a while for behavior studies and other things, and pigs are pigs. In captive situations, you have pigs that are very nice animals. You have others that are kind of mean, as you said. And so, just because it's wild caught and put in a pen doesn't mean it's not going to be any nicer or meaner than a domestic pig that was born in a pen and raised to adulthood. Some of those are mean as all get out. So, and there have been a number of people that have been killed and in some cases partially eaten by their domestic pigs. So,
yeah, I mean, from what I've heard, there's also, people do just get eaten and they're just gone, It's like,
wow.
Pig. Well, and I noticed even on the farm when I was working with my grandfather, it was his farm, but, pigs will eat each other. They'll eat anything. They're like, they're very opportunistic in my experience.
They are. They're an opportunistic omnivore. Yeah. If it's got a calorie in it and they get
exactly, they'll
eat it.
Well said. Well said. That's totally compliant with my experience. Okay, listen.
Fear and respect for pigs.
Yes. And first of all, thank you for this tremendously informative intro to pigs. Now, we're going to wind this up, and in next episode, we're going to talk about pigs as monsters, and specifically some of the giant pig cases from the sort of mid-2000s. This is very exciting. Thank you again, Dr. Mayer, for joining us, and we'll be back next week.
Monster Talk.
You've been listening to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
You just heard part one of our two-part interview with Dr. John Mayer discussing the biology of pigs and how their morphology changes in the wild. I was a little disappointed that the rumors of their massive morphological change in the wild has been overplayed in the news, but when you think about it in terms of evolutionary adaptation, this does make sense. We're all born with genetic instructions that control how our bodies will change as we grow and age, but those instructions include vast libraries of adaptive adjustments that keep us alive when calories are lower or when environmental circumstances require it. In perhaps somewhat oversimplified terms, it's not shocking that life is adapted to allow continued morphological responses to the environment. But with the feral hog, those changes have taken on monstrous narratives that are unsubstantiated by the real-world examples. Now, be sure to tune in next week when we'll be seeing how the monster hog media sausage got made. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Monster Talk. Each episode, we strive to bring you the very best in monster-related content with a focus on bringing scientific skepticism into the conversation. If you enjoy Monster Talk, we now have a variety of ways to support the show, all with convenient links at monstertalk.org/support. That's monstertalk.org/support. We have links there to our Patreon page as well as a donation button. Another great way to support the show is to buy books from our Amazon Monster Talk wish list, which directly helps us with our research. We love used books very much, so don't feel compelled to buy new ones. And we love Kindle, so we can share our digital libraries with each other. And finally, without spending any money at all, you can support us by leaving a positive review at iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Positive reviews help keep us visible in iTunes, which is a great way to help us find new listeners. And please share our show on your favorite social media platforms. Monster Talk theme music is by Peach Stealing Monkeys. Thank you for making science and monsters a part of your audio diet.
This has been a Monster House presentation.